When I was about 9, I started having this strange, recurring dream one that would quietly, yet persistently, haunt me over the course of 4 years. It didn't come every night, not even every month, but when it did, it always followed the same haunting script. Each dream began the same way. I'd be lying in my bed at night, but not from my own eyes. Instead, I saw the room from the ceiling, like I was floating in midair or watching through a surveillance camera. I was staring down at my sleeping self. It was deeply unsettling. I'd try to move, float closer, reach for something, but all I could do was turn my head and swivel my view slightly. I was trapped in a shell of awareness, like my consciousness was dangling from a string above my body. Despite knowing it was a dream, the fear didn't let up. It felt too real, too calculated. I'd eventually begin to study my room, trying to focus on familiar objects to calm myself: my nightstand, my old dresser, the worn posters on my wall. The digital clock beside my bed always ticked backward, numbers scrolling in reverse, like time itself was unspooling. Then I'd notice something else: drawings taped to the wall, crayon scribbles, the kind kids my age might make. But they weren't mine. I wasn't one to draw. I never had been. And yet there they were, pictures of people holding hands, all smiling, with one smaller figure that was clearly meant to be me. Always in front of the same house. Blue roof, square windows too. Another detail: my old toy train, the one I lost when I was 5. Somehow, it always appeared in a different spot on the floor in every dream. Sometimes near the closet, sometimes under the bed, once even perched on the windowsill. Always silent, always watching. But the worst part came last. In every dream, I'd feel an invisible tug, like a magnetic pull toward the window. I never wanted to look. I never chose to look. But my eyes would slowly turn to it as if on their own. And then, right on cue, he'd appear. A man, standing inches from the glass, peering in. He had short gray hair and a scar on his left temple, just below his hairline. His face was hard to remember in detail, like it was made of static, but that scar always stood out. He never blinked, just stared at me in that frozen, nightmarish way, like a statue breathing. Then he'd raise his hands and begin to claw at the window. Not knocking, not banging. Clawing as if trying to peel it open with his bare hands. That's usually when I'd wake up, sweating, shaking. Sometimes bolting to the window, yanking up the blinds, scanning for fingerprints. Nothing. Always nothing. By the 4th dream, I told my parents. My mom said recurring dreams were normal. My dad reassured me that they were right down the hall if I ever felt scared. But he could see in my eyes that it wasn't enough. So he walked outside with me that afternoon, barefoot, to check the grass beneath my window. No prints, no mud, no smudges. Not even a broken blade of grass. Still, the dreams kept coming. Once every 3 months, like clockwork. Until they didn't. For 6 months, they just stopped. I moved on. Forgot, as kids do. I convinced myself it had been stress or imagination. Maybe I just needed to outgrow it. But then it returned with one chilling difference. Everything was the same. The aerial view. The backward clock. The toy train. The drawings. But now, the window was open, wide open. I didn't need to see the man's face to know he was no longer on the outside. I woke up immediately, but couldn't move. My arms, my legs, even my mouth frozen. Sleep paralysis. My brain screamed at me to get up, to run, to shut the damn window. But I couldn't. I could only lie there, paralyzed and terrified, as cold air poured over my body from the open window. I could feel it, hear it. It wasn't just a dream anymore. After 5 eternal minutes, I snapped out of it. I hurled myself across the room and slammed the window shut, locked it, pushed the nightstand in front of it, then collapsed onto the floor. The next morning, I told my parents again, this time in detail. Every part of the dream, every object, every feeling. When I described the man's scar, my dad went rigid. His eyes flicked to my mom. A silent exchange passed between them. I asked what was wrong. They told me not to worry, that I was safe. But I could tell they were hiding something. 3 days later, they sat me down. My mom did most of the talking. When I was a toddler, too young to remember, I had a babysitter. Not really a babysitter, but a family friend. His name was Brian. Uncle Brian, they used to call him. He'd been around a lot when I was little. Too much, maybe. Then, something happened. A falling out. My dad wouldn't go into detail, but whatever it was enough to cut ties completely. My dad banned Brian from ever contacting us again. That would have been the end of it, except for one detail. Brian had a visible scar on his temple, from a car accident, years before I was born. They didn't say more. They didn't have to. I never remembered Brian. Not one memory. Not one image. But somehow, I had described him with eerie accuracy, down to the exact scar. My dad later suggested the dreams were my brain's way of processing repressed memories. That maybe, somehow, I remembered more than I thought. I'd been close to Brian as a child, they said. He used to read me to sleep. I'd cry when he left. But something changed. I tried to let it go. Tried. The dreams became less frequent. 1 or 2 a year. But then, in the 4th year, something terrifying happened. I woke from the dream and, just as habit, turned to the window. Something moved. Just a flicker. A silhouette stepping away from the glass. I screamed. My dad ran outside barefoot again. And this time he found something. Faint footprints. Smudged into the grass beneath the window. He called the police. I never heard sirens. They told me it was fine. That nothing would happen. And they were right. In one sense, I never had the dream again. But I never got answers either. Not from the police. Not from my parents. I stopped asking. What I can't stop thinking is this. Every time I had that dream, every time I saw him outside, what if he really was there, watching me? Just a few inches from the glass, waiting. Most nights, I fall asleep to background sounds, anything from a rainstorm to a podcast about space. It helps drown out my thoughts and usually steers my dreams in more pleasant directions. But on one particular weekend, everything was different. I was staying at my friend Duncan's house for a sleepover. No thunderstorm recordings. No soft voices explaining the cosmos. Just silence and unpredictability. Duncan's parents were away for the weekend, which meant we had the whole place to ourselves. We stayed up late eating snacks, playing video games, and joking around until our energy fizzled. Eventually, we crashed in the living room, Duncan, Ian, and me, sprawled across couches and beanbags. It was the kind of night that should have been ordinary, uneventful. But what followed was anything but. That night, I slipped into one of the most vivid, unnerving dreams I'd ever had. I was floating on a small sailboat in the middle of a churning sea. The sky above was a haunting swirl of deep purple and slate gray. Wind howled around me, not violently, but with an eerie, cinematic energy. It felt like I was in a movie, detached from reality, but acutely aware. Then, something slammed into the boat from beneath. I never saw what it was, but the jolt cracked the hull. Water surged in, fast and cold. I frantically tried to plug the breach with my jacket. It was useless. The panic was real. My heart raced. I was about to go under. And then, out of nowhere, a dolphin leapt from the sea. It looked me in the eyes and spoke. "Wake up." The voice was clear, human. That single command snapped me out of the dream like a detonated alarm. I gasped awake, sweating, heart pounding. The room was quiet, still. Duncan and Ian were asleep. Everything seemed normal until my brain started piecing something together. A sound. A faint but steady rush of water. At first, I brushed it off as dream residue, my mind clinging to ocean waves. But no, this was real. It was coming from upstairs. Not dripping or trickling, but full, unbroken flow. Like a hose left running. Confused and uneasy, I sat up and listened. It was definitely running water. I told myself it was probably nothing, but my curiosity got the better of me. I crept up the stairs, barefoot, trying not to wake the others. The sound grew louder with every step. At the top of the stairs was the bathroom door, slightly ajar. From where I stood, I could see inside just enough. One of the faucet knobs was twisted completely to the right. The sink was blasting water at full force. But here's the thing. Duncan's family is meticulous. The house is tidy, organized. Faucets aren't left on by accident, and no one had been upstairs all night. A chill crept down my spine. I froze outside the door, hesitant. The bathroom wasn't small. It had a long counter, a bathtub with a curtain, and a cramped corner where the toilet sat. Too many blind spots. Anyone could have been crouching behind that tub, hiding. My gut screamed at me to turn around. So I did. I ran back down the stairs and shook Duncan awake. He groggily opened one eye, annoyed until I told him what was happening. The urgency in my voice snapped him alert. I whispered that I thought someone was in the house. He didn't ask questions. We crept back upstairs together. I stayed behind him as he pushed open the bathroom door and stepped inside. That's when it happened. A man lunged from behind the tub, slamming into Duncan from the side. Everything exploded in chaos. The guy was bigger than either of us, and swinging a piece of PVC pipe like a weapon. Duncan hit the floor hard. Without thinking, I dove onto the attacker, trying to pull him off. We wrestled, all three of us tangled in a blur of limbs and panic. He was stronger than we expected. He broke free, shoved us both down, and bolted for the stairs. We chased him, but by the time we reached the front door, he was gone. 30 minutes later, the police arrived. They found the point of entry a downstairs window left unlocked. There were no cameras in the house, no evidence to track. The police chalked it up as a burglary. Said the guy probably thought the house was empty, got scared, and ran. But none of that sat right with us. If he'd come to rob the place, why turn on the faucet? Why make noise? Why lay in wait behind the bathtub? It wasn't random. It was a trap. Duncan had a theory, one that chilled me more than the man's attack. He believed the intruder had been watching the house. He knew Duncan's parents were away. Maybe he'd seen their car leave. Maybe he'd watched from the trees. Duncan was convinced the man thought only one person would be home that night, Duncan himself. He might have planned to kill him. That realization hit like a brick. And then I remembered the dream, the voice, the dolphin, the command to wake up. What if my mind knew something I didn't? What if my subconscious was reacting to a sound, a shift, an atmosphere? The faucet had been on. The dream featured a boat filling with water. The message had been urgent. Was it coincidence or something more? To this day, I still don't know. But I do know this. If I hadn't woken up when I did, if that dream hadn't pulled me from sleep, we might not have made it through that night. Sometimes, your brain senses things before your body does. Sometimes, dreams aren't just dreams. Sometimes, they're warnings. It started as a normal Friday night. Bonnie's parents had gone out of town for their anniversary, which meant she had the house all to herself, and naturally, she invited me over. It was a rare opportunity for us to spend the night together, without worrying about curfews or being quiet past midnight. She lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where every house looked the same: manicured lawns, two-story homes, and absolute stillness by 10 p.m. We spent the evening just like any other: snacks, a movie, a few laughs, and then eventually retreating upstairs to her room. Bonnie's bedroom faced the backyard, and from her window, you could barely make out the dense tree line that bordered their property. At night, those trees looked like a wall of pure darkness. No street lights, no neighbors with porch lights on, just blackness. It was after midnight when we finally turned off the lights. Her queen-sized bed gave us more than enough space, so we lay side by side, drifting off to the kind of sleep that only quiet neighborhoods and full bellies can bring. That's when it began. I had what's known as a false awakening. In the dream, I woke up suddenly to the loud slam of a door downstairs. My heart jolted, and my first instinct was to jump out of bed, but something held me back. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was confusion. The room looked exactly like how it had moments before: same messy pile of clothes, same faint scent of her perfume, same nightlight glow from the corner. Nothing was out of place except one thing. There was a strip of yellow light glowing from beneath the bedroom door. I stared at it, confused. We had turned off all the lights. That was the last thing I remembered before falling asleep. So what was that glow? And why was one suddenly frozen in place? Then came the footsteps. Fast, heavy, and climbing the stairs, pounding rhythmically, as though someone had charged into the house with one destination in mind, our room. Still frozen, I listened as the steps reached the top and stopped right outside the door. Silence. Then, voices. It began with one woman's voice, nasty, sneering, saying the cruelest things about me. My looks, my future, the kind of person I was. I tried to shut it out, but it was like she knew me. She spoke about things no one could have known, secrets, memories, things I hadn't told Bonnie or anyone else. Then more voices joined in, 2, 3, then a dozen, then dozens, all of them mocking me, reciting my darkest regrets and fears. It felt like my brain was being dissected and broadcast, for all these invisible entities to analyze. I couldn't take it anymore. I broke free from my frozen state, ran to the door, and flung it open. Darkness, complete, suffocating blackness rushed in like a wave. The voices stopped. The air turned cold, ice cold. My skin prickled. My body screamed to retreat. I stumbled back to the bed, dove under the covers, heart hammering in my ears, and then I woke up. Or so I thought. I was still dreaming. I sat up, disoriented but relieved. The room looked exactly the same. I took a breath. Then I saw it. The same strip of yellow light beneath the door. And a moment later, slam. The downstairs door again. The same footsteps racing up the stairs. I couldn't believe it. The dream was repeating, down to the second. Everything unfolded the same way. The footsteps, the voices, the feeling of helplessness. When I reached the door a second time and opened it again, the blackness returned, engulfing me, choking out the voices. It was like being dragged between two realities, one fake, one real, but both terrifying. When I finally awoke, for real, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, Bonnie was sound asleep beside me. No light beneath the door, no voices, no darkness, just silence. I sat up, trying to convince myself that it had all been a dream. But then, just as I turned to check the door, my heart nearly stopped. The light was back. That same faint yellow glow spilled beneath the door, just like in my dreams. But I was awake. I knew it. I could feel my body. I could hear Bonnie's soft breathing. This wasn't sleep paralysis or a false awakening. Then I heard it, real footsteps. Someone was downstairs. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my phone and quietly dialed 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, telling them someone was in the house. Then I gently nudged Bonnie awake, placing my hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. She didn't panic. She nodded, wide-eyed and alert. We stayed silent, listening to the movements downstairs. Then, banging. The front door being kicked in. Shouts. Chaos. The police had arrived. After what felt like an eternity, the noise died down. I crept downstairs and found 2 masked men being handcuffed and led to squad cars. The officers asked a few questions, then reassured us we were safe.